You gonna sit? Hello everyone, my name is Allison. I'm a knitter based in Nebraska and I'm going to tell you about a lot of different works in progress today. I'm not sure if you can see him, but I have my cat Jack next to me. We'll see how long he decides to stick around, but this is Jackie. He is a snowshoe cat who we adopted from a shelter when we lived in New Orleans, and he's got a lot of personality, so he likes to jump in and out, and he really likes to be involved when I am talking, so you might see his tail flicking about as I talk. But I wanted to jump in to the very first thing, which last episode was just a swatch, and I know it's been a few weeks, but I've got kind of the majority of my Oversized Seasons Cardigan done. So this Oversized Seasons Cardigan is a pattern by Ozetta. I am knitting this in Peace Fleece in the shade Antarctic White, and I am knitting a size medium. I am getting gauge, or at least like very close to gauge, with no modifications to the needles or anything, so I'm just knitting it as is, size medium, very few changes to the pattern so far, or like the bulk of the pattern. So pardon, like every time I move this, it's going to be clicking and clanking because I didn't have, you're supposed to be doing the front like neckline with DPNs, and I didn't have DPNs, but I did have little fixed circulars. So now whenever I move it, it clinks and clanks a lot. But the last time you would have seen this, it was just a little swatch. A sweater had not even been started really, and now I have basically the entire body done besides the bottom hem. So the bottom hem is like pretty significant. It's like 4 inches more, like longer than it is right now. So I do still have quite a bit of knitting to do on the body of this. However, it has just been like flying off the needles, which has been really enjoyable for me. So I did want to talk slightly about the very beginning of this pattern because I did have kind of, not a lot of trouble, but I did rip it out like 3 times before I got to the point where I could like move forward, because I think this pattern is written in a way that's a little bit different for how I process information. So I know different designers, you know, everybody writes things in different ways, and you can write, you know, the same instructions 6 different ways and get the exact same result, but have it be very different descriptions of how to get there. All of that is to say, it's not necessarily that there's anything wrong with the pattern, but it's just written in a way that doesn't quite like vibe with how I understand. And when I was having, not like a bunch, but when I was having issues with getting started with this pattern, I started reading through other people's notes on Ravelry to see like, what's going on? Why am I having this issue? And I did see a couple other people say kind of similar things. So I think what it comes down to is you have to read like the whole section for whatever it is that you're doing before starting on it. Because oftentimes what I have seen is that something that I would consider important information, or not important information, but something that I would consider like part of like the top information, or something that I would want to know first before starting, tends to be like lower in that section of the pattern than I would put it myself, I guess. So I often, what I started doing, or what I'm doing now with this pattern, is reading through the whole section of whatever it is that I'm working on before jumping into it, which is kind of hard for me. I'm definitely someone who likes to like skim a pattern and jump right in. But not something that at least I can do on this pattern. It's very much like read the whole thing, very much conceptualize how is that going to work, and then kind of translate it in my head into like simpler instructions, I guess, of how am I going to accomplish this part of the pattern. I have done very few modifications to this sweater pattern besides at the very beginning. So if you are knitting the Oversized Seasons Cardigan, you'll know you start knitting basically from the back neckline, and then it grows out from there. And you start knitting it with the collar, and there's supposed to be a garter stitch section, which I tried a couple of times and ripped it out because I just didn't really get it. Like I didn't get what the purpose of it was stylistically and also for like the structure of the garment. It wasn't vibing for me. So instead of doing that garter stitch section, I just did it in plain ribbing. So my whole neckline is just ribbing. There's none of the garter stitch. And then the other thing that I did is, at least the way that I was reading it, it seemed like there was a couple of setup rows before you got into the half fisherman's rib, which the entire sweater is knit in for the most part. And the way that I was doing it for the back neckline, it had like 2 rows of just plain knitting, and I didn't like how that looked. So I went straight in, like from picking up the back neckline right into the half fisherman's rib. And I do think that the back neckline looks better for it. And like I said, I was having a little bit of trouble with the pattern, especially at the very, very beginning. So it totally could have been that the pattern was written correctly and I was just interpreting it wrong. But this is how I have gotten to the majority of this sweater body being done. I am finding this such an enjoyable knit. It's also going so quickly. I think it is knit on somewhat bigger-ish needles. I think these are size 8. Let's see. Yeah. So the main body needles are knit on a size 8, and it is like flying by for me. So there are 4 buttons on the front of the cardigan. I have knit 3 buttonholes and I'm almost to my next buttonhole. So that is very exciting. I should definitely be finishing the body of this sweater in the next couple of days, and we'll see how fast I can rep out the sleeves. Although when you're knitting half fisherman's rib flat, you're doing mostly knitting, because when you're on the back side of the fabric, it needs to have like the purl bump on the front side. So when you're knitting it in the round, that means you're purling every other round, instead of when you're knitting it flat, you're knitting every other round. So it might take me a little bit longer to go through the sleeves than I may want. However, I'm so excited to have this sweater complete. I think it's going to be very much a staple sweater in my wardrobe. It's very reminiscent to me of the Tradlands shelter cardigan, which is like a store-bought cardigan, and I think it's really cute. And there's a lot of, like, if you search on Instagram for ways people have styled that, it's pretty much how I'm going to be styling this sweater. Very much like an oversized, almost like jackety kind of sweater, which is perfect for right now. It's kind of annoying because I am like so ready for cooler weather. I'm very much a cool weather gal. I do not agree with warm weather. My body doesn't like it. And we're like halfway through September. So mentally, for me, I am like in fall season. My whole like life is ready for spooky season. I'm ready for like Halloween movies, the whole shebang. However, we are like right at the end of summer in the Midwest, where it's like randomly 100 degrees one day, and then the next day will be 70 degrees, and it's just not the vibe. I really am like ready for actual cool weather, and I'm hoping that it gets here soon. Like, I can't wear any knits today because today is going to be another one of the warm days, but I know once it finally gets a little bit cooler, this is definitely going to be a staple in my closet. Working with this yarn has been really, really nice so far. I'm just really into the texture that this yarn has. It has a little bit of mohair in it, which gives it a tiny bit of a halo, and it also is just like super, super soft. I'm still picking out like quite a bit of debris as I'm knitting, which I don't like love doing, but I would rather do it to use this yarn than to not do it. But I haven't yet washed my swatch in the wash. I asked this when I was showing off the swatch for this pattern, if people have knit like anything in Peace Fleece, if they have used or washed it in the washing machine, because they say you can. And some people did say that yes, they have washed it in the washing machine, still lay flat to dry. So I'm really interested to see how my swatch is going to work for that, because that would make washing this sweater so much easier, because it did take absolutely ages to dry. And I think getting it in like the spin cycle in the washing machine to like get a lot of that water out is going to help it dry much faster. And the washing machine can also wash it, not like more aggressively. I don't want it to be washed aggressively, but it's going to do a longer wash than I would, you know, manually. And that'll get some of the kind of sheepiness out of this wool, because it does have a little bit of a sheepy scent to it. I can feel that there's like some lanolin still in the wool, and I don't mind that, but it's also like, I don't necessarily want to smell sheepy all the time, and if I'm going to be wearing this all the time, then I kind of need to wash out the sheepy scent. I always think to myself, like when I'm knitting something, if I would knit it again, because I am somebody who knits things over and over again, and I would absolutely knit this again. Like I haven't even finished it, I haven't worn it like properly yet, it doesn't even have sleeves, but I know that this is a pattern that I'm going to be returning to, because besides the fact that it's like gorgeous, it's also like a pretty easy, soothing knit. It's like just enough like different things each round to keep you paying attention and keep it interesting, but it's also like pretty easy. Like it's not a super difficult knit, where the Big Love cardigan, which I'm very much obsessed with, it's so warm. I keep wearing it like in the basement. I work from home and I work in the basement of our house, and it can get really cold down there, especially in the mornings when it's like cool outside. And it even though it's in just like one strand of Plutolopi, it is so insulating, so warm. I'm interested to see how this Peace Fleece differs. But what I was trying to say is that the Big Love cardigan, there's a lot going on. Like it's definitely much more of a pay attention knit to me, where this is like right in the sweet spot of like enough to pay attention to keep you interested, but not so much that you're like, this is a thinker, you can't have the TV on or whatever. It's very much like a meditative, easy, like good, fun knit. So I definitely foresee another Oversized Seasons cardigan in my future, probably a different color, not probably, definitely a different color. I think in the future too, if I were to knit another one, I would probably knit it a little bit smaller, because this is obviously oversized, and I think that it'd be nice to have a little bit of variety with different colors, a little bit different like amounts of ease. But I'm very into this pattern. I'm just excited to have the finished result and then future versions of it. So next up is something completely different, and I don't think that I've shown this to you before, but I have a self-drafted slipper sock. This is just the one. I have not yet started on the second one, and I am knitting this. I am knitting this in Nutiden yarn and also a strand of Mohair, and this is Neighborhood Fiber Company's Mohair in the shade, where are you? This is in the shade Charles Village, and the Nutiden is in their like uncolored base. I think it's called Snow. So I knit the cuff of these socks a very long time ago, like months and months, and then just like set it down, never touched it again until basically this week when I finished the rest of the sock. So I started this pattern pretty shortly after we moved into this house, and I was working in the basement, and like I said, in the mornings and during the winter, the basement stays really cold. And I had just gotten my Nutiden yarn. I'd never used it before, and I wanted to get like a feel for how to use the yarn. I wanted to see how it like worked up, how it felt as you were knitting it. And I was like, the perfect thing for me to do would be to knit a pair of super thick socks that I can wear while I'm in the basement and it's really cold and I need something on my feet, but I don't want to wear like shoes or slippers. And that is how we got to what I'm calling my unspun slipper socks. I knit these kind of with a shorter leg. It's broken 2x2 rib, and I put mohair in at the heels and toes, both for strength and also just for looks. I think that it looks really cute. I think these are going to be so warm. I'm knitting it at a really tight gauge for how lofty this yarn is. So I am knitting these with US size 2 needles, but I'm holding the Nutiden double And then I'm also holding it Nutiden double plus Mohair for the heels and toes. So it is quite a bit of yarn that I'm forcing into quite a tight gauge to get almost like a felted effect. Like I wanted kind of like a felted style slipper sock without having to actually do the felting and risk completely screwing it up, or like over felting it and making it too small, or not being able to shrink it down to the exact size that I wanted it. I wanted to be able to get it to exactly the correct size. And for me, the easiest way to do that was just to knit it at a really, really tight gauge. That being said, knitting this at such a tight gauge isn't the most pleasant experience because each stitch is quite tight. You're not fighting the yarn, but it is definitely not like a super quick, like easy to pass the yarn through, especially doing the decreases on like the gusset and on the toes. That was kind of difficult to like get everything where you need it to be without like splitting the yarn and splitting all of the stitches or dropping stitches. It definitely makes it slightly more, not time consuming necessarily, because it was a really quick, sock to knit, but it is something where you do need to pay a bit more attention just because each stitch is not like a super smooth, easy glide. You are like really like working each stitch to get the density and to get the gauge really nice and tight. That being said, these are so soft and the fabric is so thick that I really think that they're going to make like the best slipper socks, or like bed socks even. Like if you get really, really cold feet in winter, I think that these are going to be amazing. So I'm looking forward to doing my second sock. I didn't measure out anything as I was doing these. Like I didn't measure to see how much yarn I used, or really write down anything with the pattern. Luckily, it's very easy to count when you're doing ribbing like this all over. So I think what I am going to do is actually measure it out for the second one so I can translate it to a pattern more easily. The other thing that I did for this, which I've never done before on a pair of socks, is instead of doing a Kitchener stitch for the toe, which is like pretty much my standard go-to, I basically just didn't want to try to get like these tight stitches with the super loose and springy Nutiden. Like this yarn falls apart so easily, and I just didn't want to try to force it to go through other stitches while on the needle. I just felt like it sounded like asking for trouble. So what I did, instead of any of like the normal, I guess, sock closures, I turned the whole sock inside out when I got to like the end of my toe decreases, and I did a 3 needle bind off from the inside, and I think that it looks great. I might try it on a pair of like normal socks, like a pair of normal fingering weight standard regular socks, and try that with the 3 needle bind off from the inside and see how that wears and see how that feels, because that might be like that might be the future. Like that was just such an easy way, and I think it looks really nice and clean from the outside of the toe as well. So like, why are we not doing 3 needle bind off on toes? I think that it's going to be really, really nice. I do have 2 more things to show you, but I have just been like spending so much time on that Oversized Seasons cardigan that not much else has gotten much attention. So last week we had a family wedding that was in Indiana. We had to drive not like the furthest distance that we've traveled for family events, but a pretty decently long drive. So I basically said to myself, I'm not bringing the Oversized Seasons cardigan. Not only did I not want to have to kind of lug it around, it's a pretty big sweater, but I wanted to make sure that I actually took some time to get some progress done on some knits that have been kind of languishing. They haven't had a lot of attention in the last several months, and I wanted to get a little bit of progress done. So I have my Cozy Classic Light, another one by Jessie May. I'm knitting this in Purl Soho Cattail Silk, and the shade is Cerulean Velvet. And last time I showed this to you, I had just separated the sleeves. So I did get quite a bit of progress done on this over the course of the drive. I mean, that's like 4 or 5 inches of the body. But what I'm doing on this one is the same that I did on my first version of this sweater, and knitting it with just one ball of the yarn. And I have so much of it left. Part of the reason why I am knitting this again is because I wanted to get a tighter fit than I did on my first one. And this yarn, when I washed it, the sweater, like the sweater that I knit, went out, like it got quite a bit wider and a little bit shorter. So I was like, okay, I will just knit this in a smaller size. This is an extra small, and I'm also knitting it on slightly smaller needles to try to get a little bit more length so it's not so cropped. I do get a ton of wear out of my first one, but it is pretty cropped. So I was hoping to get more length, and I am, but now I'm also getting really bored because it's just stockinette in the round. I really need to do like a movie marathon weekend or something. Like I need to have an excuse for just purely mindless knitting and using that as an excuse to like get the rest of the sweater done. But I finally did get some progress done on this. I'm hoping to get it done before the summer is like completely over. So hopefully before the end of September I will finish this, because it is a t-shirt and maybe I can get a little bit of wear of it before next summer, but we shall see. The other project that I brought with me is my half and half triangle strap, and this is just absolutely enormous, so goodbye. This is finally on the second color. So I have been knitting this for months and months, and it's very much something I have to make myself work on. I'm not enjoying it, but I really want the finished object. This is definitely something that I have to like make myself work on, which doesn't sound very nice, but I mean, that's the honest truth of it. I was talking, about my Oversized Seasons cardigan, saying like, oh, I'll definitely be knitting this again in the future. I will absolutely not be knitting this again in the future. It is very much a not a process knit. It is a product knit for me, where I want the end product of it. But man, it is not my cup of tea to actually sit there and knit it. It's just so boring. It's just garter stitch back and forth and back and forth and back and forth for absolutely ever. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. It's very much a me thing that I don't particularly like knitting flat, and I don't particularly like knitting garter stitch. So why did I choose to knit an absolutely enormous garter stitch, like blanket basically? It's like going to be more or less lap blanket sized at like such a small gauge. This is knit on US size 3 needles with fingering weight yarn. It's madness. Why did I choose to do that? But like I said, I finally got to the second color, so we were like seeing some progress. It took me absolutely ages to finish the first one. I am knitting this in the yarn that's called for in the pattern. It is Purl Soho Linen Quill. The lighter pink color is Peony Pink, and the darker kind of red color is called Chestnut Red, and I love how this looks together. It gives me a similar vibe to what I was going for with my Garter Glide t-shirt that I showed, I think in my most recent episode, could have been the one before, where it was like a tonal half and half t-shirt. This is kind of the same idea that I wanted with this, where it's a darker red and a lighter red pink color, and I think it's going to be so cute. I am really looking forward to wearing this in the winter this year, but man, I do need to make myself work on this. So kind of the same with my Cozy Classic Light body, where it's just like, you gotta work on it, you gotta just do it, stockinette in the round. This is kind of the same thing, like you just gotta do it, garter stitch, knit flat. I need to just sit there and work on it until it's done, because man, each row now is getting longer and longer and longer, and I've got a whole lot of them left to do. So it is going to take me a while to eventually finish this, I am putting zero pressure on myself to try to get this done by any particular time because it is something that I'm not like enjoying knitting. So we shall see if I even finish this year. I'm not going to try to force myself to finish this in any particular time because once it's done, then I'm gonna have it forever, you know? Like, it doesn't need to be done by any particular time, and I do think that this is going to be just one of those things that I'm going to love for years and years to come. So I am excited to have the final project, but man, I do need to make myself work on it. I mentioned in my last episode that I am going to be knitting my husband a sweater this year for his Christmas/birthday, and I'm knitting him the Leelanau sweater, and it's going to be in Cascade 220. The main color for the sweater is this dark blue. It's gorgeous. This shade I believe is called Atlantic. And then for the little seed stitches throughout, I'm using a kind of light-ish gray. This is also Cascade 220 in, I think it's called Silver Gray. I think these are going to look so good together. I'm glad that I finally got them. I actually ordered these through Woolen Company, which, funny enough, my parents used to live very close to their original store. Their original store was in St. Charles, Illinois. And so I had been there plenty of times, you know, almost like as a kid, before I was a knitter, like whatsoever. I had definitely been to their store with my mom. So it's just kind of funny to like think back on that and what their store used to look like, because they have recently moved into what has been described to me as a warehouse. I haven't been to the new location yet. My parents still live fairly close to it, as do my in-laws. And I know that my mother-in-law has been there so far. I don't think my mom has yet. And she said, like, they have any yarn you can think of, like, in person in the store that you can like reach and touch and see it, which is just so wild to me. So she had mentioned that to me and I was like, okay, well, I'll just like take a look on their website, and it is humongous. It's wild how much stuff they have. So next time that I'm in town to visit my parents or my in-laws for long enough to like do a yarn store trip, I really want to get to the actual Woolen Company store to see it in real person, in real life. But I knew that I wanted to knit this sweater and a vest for my dad in Cascade 220, and I was looking at different websites where I could order it from, and they had the best deal. So you got a deal not only on like, I think it was on a sweater quantity of yarn, but it was also like free shipping. There was like a lot of different deals that went together to get this yarn fairly inexpensively. So I have that for my husband, and then I also got Cascade 220 for a vest for my dad. This I think is called Gray Heather. I'm looking at the tag and it just has the numbers on it, but I'll put it on the screen. The color number is 9491, and it is like a darker medium toned gray. So this is the silver gray. It is much lighter. It's a little bit more like cool tone, I think. And this is very slightly warmer and darker. And I'm going to be using this to knit the office vest for my dad pretty soon. It's kind of funny because I got the yarn in, immediately caked up the yarn for my husband's sweater, like I did the entire sweater quantity all at once. And now that I'm getting to the point of like finishing up the sweater that I'm working on and like need to get into gift knitting season, now I'm craving doing cables. Like I have just had cables on the mind. I really want to do cables. This will be a cabled project. This will not be. So now I need to cake up all of the yarn for my dad's vest so that I can do the cabled project when I'm in the mood for cables. Which is kind of funny. I actually have like the yarn in front of me. I wasn't necessarily going to talk about it, but cables have been on the mind. Summer Lee just released her Cider House socks, which are gorgeous. And honestly, I probably still will end up knitting them. I was like thinking to myself, no, like you have so many works in progress on the go right now. You have other socks, like I have multiple other pairs of socks that I'm knitting at the moment. I really don't need to cast on another pair of socks. However, these socks are gorgeous and I do want them. So I might have picked out yarn from my stash to already do it and I can show it to you. So I'm not 100% definitely going to knit these socks, but if I were to knit them, then the main color for the socks would be this candy apple mohair silk sock from Sweet Georgia. I just got this when we visited Vancouver. More than a month ago, I think at this point. Yeah, definitely more than a month. I have a whole video of like that whole trip yarn wise that you can see, but I got this at the Sweet Georgia store. It is super soft, very, very slightly variegated, and I think it would be gorgeous for cables. And then it also has quite like a statement cuff. So I was thinking I would do it in white. This is Lion Brand's sock yarn. I can't remember exactly what they call it. It's quite rough to the touch. It's not my favorite sock yarn, but it is what I have on hand that's white. And I was thinking doing these stripes in this Cloudborne Fibers Highland Superwash Sock Twist in the color Maize Heather. But I thought all three of these together just make the most autumnal socks. I think that this would just be a really, really nice combination. I will probably end up knitting it, but I really need to get some of my works in progress off my plate before I add more to it. Outside of those socks, I have also been thinking about knitting a like bulkier sweater. So I think it's pronounced Corchevon slipover. I am probably butchering that, but I will put the title on the screen. I have been thinking about knitting that also in Nutiden, held either double or maybe triple. It is meant to be with a bulky weight yarn, and this is from several months ago. I believe the name of this yarn is Adakavat, but it is like a kind of grayishy brown shade that I think would be absolutely gorgeous. This slipover is very, very bulky looking, and it is done in like a basket weave stitch. And I think that this yarn being super lofty and in like this kind of moody colorway would be really, really beautiful for that slipover. But like I said, I need to at least cast on like the main gifts that I'm knitting this year. Instead of doing like little gifts for lots of people, I'm doing bigger gifts for a smaller amount of people. And I need to kind of get them going before I keep knitting more stuff for myself. So that is my goal. My goal is to finish my oversized season cardigan for myself and then really get going on my gift knits for this year before I start like casting things on willy-nilly. But that is all of the yarny updates that I have for you today. I hope that you are having a good one, and I will see you next time. Bye.